Good morning, all. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and a warm welcome to today's session, where we'll be discussing how to unlock financial services to accelerate access to quality basic services. My name is Christine Gashui, and I'm part of the business consulting and research team at Intellecap. And my work basically focuses on financial inclusion, and I'm honored and privileged today to be your moderator for this session. Why this session, and why I would like to begin with setting a context of why we think this is an important discussion that we should have today. It's mainly around because Africa has witnessed a rise in access to a wide variety of financial services, especially with the growth of the mobile industry in Africa. Where, for instance, GSMA notes that sub-Saharan Africa continues to lead in terms of the number of mobile money accounts that have been adopted across Africa. And actually, they go on to say that it's expected that we should have surpassed the 500 million mark in terms of adoption of mobile money accounts by the end of 2020, which was last year. However, despite these achievements, the COVID pandemic has brought to the forefront some of the challenges in accessing basic services and the critical role that financial services needs to play in ensuring that the population, especially the low-income populations in Africa, are able to access these critical basic services. So we are speaking about access to quality education, access to decent housing, and access to different agricultural services. So just to give as an example, what COVID has brought to the forefront is, for instance, if I take the education sector, we have seen closures of many non-state or private schools, and financial services had a role to play in ensuring that these schools continue, in providing education and supplementing what the public sector is providing in education. Similarly, the same gaps have been seen in housing, the housing sector, where, for instance, informal settlements are rampant in the urban cities in Africa, and also in the rural areas, trying to see how best to get decent housing into the hands of the low-income populations in Africa. And the same can be said as well for the agriculture sector. The agriculture sector has seen many innovations in terms of value chain financing, digital financing, but despite these strides, there still exist gaps in terms of how do we scale some of these interventions to get them to reach millions and millions of Africans. So this session is designed as an interactive masterclass session where we'll be diving deep into 4 key sectors. So how does DFS enable enable basic services? And then we go into in-depth assessment of the agriculture sector, the education sector, and the affordable housing sector, and how financial services is enabling access to these basic services. And with that, to unpack this discussion, I am joined by a stellar panel of speakers drawn from different ecosystem categories in the financial inclusion ecosystem. And they are all actively involved in designing and implementing financial interventions to enable access to these services. And so I'll take this opportunity just to do a quick round of introductions of each speaker, and then we can move into the meat of the discussion. So our first speaker is Jacqueline Juma, who is the program head of digital financial services at EFINA, and she'll be shedding more light on how DFS is enabling access to basic services and why this industry needs to sharpen its laser focus on impact creation to enable growth of the real economy in Africa. Our second speaker will be Elizabeth Masters, Chief of Staff at Apollo Agriculture, who will be candid about their SME experience in raising funding and how this funding is enabling or accelerating access for agricultural services in Africa. Our third speaker will be Grace Mberia, who is the Deputy Team Leader at Mastercard Foundation Fund for Rural Prosperity, who will help us understand the critical parameters that funders look at and how agri-financing impact is measured and tracked by different funders. Our fourth speaker is Amos Mwangi, who heads and runs Ed Partners Africa, which is a financial institution that is exclusively providing financial interventions for the education sector in Africa. And he'll be shedding light on the importance of designing tailor-made products for the education sector in Africa. And last but definitely not least is George Mugweri, who is the lead of the housing finance systems domain at Habitat for Humanity International, who will be discussing about how COVID has brought forth the dire state of the housing sector in Africa. And we'll also be discussing what are some of the innovative financial interventions that are currently being targeted towards decent housing in cities and in rural areas of Africa. So without much further ado, I would like to hand over the mic to Jacqueline, who will continue to set a context for this discussion. And I would also, as she prepares to share her screen, invite all participants to post your comments or questions for the speakers in the chat section. And we look forward to hearing your views on this important topic. Over to you, Jacqueline.
I'll start off the session by just having an overview of appreciating the need to have an improved narrative for greater DFS impact. Given the COVID context and the fact that COVID is actually an opportunity for reforms and revisiting the financial inclusion agenda and what this means to the daily lives of the people in the low income segment. Mm-hmm. So I'll start off by revisiting the market. What really are the users of the solutions, or who is the beneficiary of all the programs around financial inclusion initiatives, and just the people that we are actually advocating for. And when you look at the market perspectives, regardless of which market you're looking at, the portfolios are the same. So for example, I've picked some personas from the Human Account by Dalberg, where we have Marion from Kenya and we have Amaka from Nigeria. When you look at their needs, okay, they're sort of different, but at the same time, they're the same. They have the same aspirations. They're not only talking about accessing financial services, they're talking about accessing financial services. Like in the case of Marion, she has needs around, taking care of her children, because, she even says that if it's not about her children, then it's not anything. And at the same time, Amaka's aspirations are also around, yes, access to financial services, but she's looking forward to, using her earnings to buy food and send her kids to school and so on and so forth. So it's just, again, appreciating that, look, we have done so much in terms of financial services, but what exactly are the financial services doing in the lives of these people? And appreciating what has been done so far. The industry has come from very far. The Global Findex Report 2017 and many other reports, including the GSMA 2019 State of the Industry Report, they actually speak of, how far the industry has come in terms of ramping up technology. And, the Sub-Saharan Africa is leading in terms of providing access to these accounts. And there's also the focus that, Sub-Saharan Africa will continue to lead in terms of the adoption of accounts. But is this enough? Is the penetration of accounts enough? And it also begs the question, it's an opportunity for us to just ask ourselves, so what does penetration of accounts or financial inclusion from an account perspective mean to the lives of Marion and Amaka, like we have seen in the previous slide? Because when you even look at other metrics and indicators that we have built around programs, from the simplest of the metrics, for example, account activity, we are basing an account activity on the basis of 30 days. So saying, for example, if Amaka transacts once in 30 days, then she's active. Is that one transaction in 30 days really translating to improving Amaka's life or Marion's life? I think it's a question for all of us, and it's important that we have this session today. To improve lives, it just means that we first need to look at what really Marion and Amaka are looking for. They're looking to access basic services. And by basic services, first to understand what basic services means, we could again revisit the Sustainable Development Goals to appreciate that these have been identified that that they have been identified as the very minimum services that people actually need for better lives. So looking all through the different goals, whether it's to do with access to food, or even just equality, access to water, etc. This should be the starting point in terms of defining what we mean by basic services, because I think that it's not only about access to basic services, it's actually about the well-being of Amaka and Marion. And facilitating access to finance to basic services empowers or brings about that well-being in their lives. In terms of the narrative, so over the last couple of years, 10 years or so, we've been talking it's been largely about financial inclusion. Going forward, in terms of what EFINA and pretty much the larger FSD network is doing. So the FSD network, including EFINA, is committed to a new FSD 2.0, or what we're calling FSD 2.0 strategic approach, which considers the financial sector development reorientation towards the real economy sector problems. So looking at the problems or challenges or friction areas in the real economy sectors and building strategies and which include creating linkages between financial services and these real economic sector, these real economy sectors. By that, we have designed this sort of theory of change, which looks at inclusive economies characterized by increased and retained jobs and livelihoods that are improved. And then looking at access to basic services, and then sustainable futures from the perspective of fairness, equality, and basically generally social well-being amongst individuals and communities. And we have also built further broken this down into what really can what sort of tools should the financial services stakeholders use in terms of ensuring that these outcomes are achieved. One of the biggest approaches to this is through digital financial services, and just appreciating the role of DFS in driving in driving this conversation. So within the network, and particularly within EFINA, we have adapted, if you may notice, our theory of change has adapted a bit of the CGAP's theory of change, where we have identified that DFS, if we focus digital financial services into improving access to financial resources, human capital, and improving the physical capability of people, we're actually going to lead to improved resilience amongst the low-income people. And by resilience, we just mean that they're able to prepare themselves against any risks. They're able to recover after shocks, and so on and so forth. And we've seen how resilience has been really critical in the wake of COVID-19. And we've also begun seeing how different stakeholders are leveraging DFS to promote resilience. On the other hand, there's also we are also driving opportunity, and by driving opportunity, it means that it just means that we are empowering people to be able to chase after opportunities through investments, or just having access to markets, etc. Again, when you have resilience on one hand and you have opportunity on the other hand, there's a tendency to have improved lives. Why? Because the more resilient you are, the more able you are to survive in the now, and you're also able to explore additional opportunities that are going to make you more resilient. So it's sort of it's a cycle that leads to the well-being of Amaka and Marion. Moving into the examples, we have the collaborative, we have examples of the specific projects that have been lined up in terms of providing or facilitating access to food security. One of them is at network level, we have this collaborative program that is leveraging DFS to promote food security, and particularly looking at how might digital financial services facilitate access to finance for smallholder farmers and agribusinesses. And it's, there are different, we have identified different projects, starting with providing credible market information on how the industry needs to transform, because as it is, we don't have clear identified linkages between formal financial services and the basic services. For example, from the financial services, from the financial service providers, they don't have a fair understanding of the business case that is out there within these value chains, particularly the agricultural value chain. Once they begin to understand the business case, and of course the business case is attributable to credible sources of information, facilitating these financial service providers to move into these value chains and support access to food, for instance. So apart from just the credible market information, there are other value chain development initiatives that also, for instance, are geared towards promoting partnerships or even just innovation around the farming practices, and also improving the institutional capacity of the financial service stakeholders to be able to create these linkages with real economy problems around food security. And a second example is what specifically EFINA has been able to do as regards promoting access to basic services. And this is through introducing this £2 million fund, which is geared towards, supporting stakeholders or institutions out there that are innovating to facilitate access to healthcare or access to food and even access to liquidity, because we realized from a number of researchers, as you can see in the screen, that during the pandemic, of course, a lot of people lost their jobs. A lot of them who even had, a lot of the MSMEs who rely on friends and family for fundraising had no options, or their options were limited. They were either using up their savings, or the options around family and friends were depleted because, hey, so many of the people lost their jobs. So this fund, unlike the traditional funds that we had, because traditionally we've always had grants that go to support financial services stakeholders. This time around, we didn't limit the innovation to only financial services stakeholders, because ideas can come from anywhere, and we noticed that they're all today in today's world. It's very different to categorize the business models of fintechs, for example. So that's why we let it open to any entity out there in Nigeria that was building solutions to promote access to healthcare and food and money. And just to share some of the useful takeaways from constructing our theory of change, we have 4 takeaways. The first one is in improving the well-being requires both resilience, whereby resilience just means, like I said, the ability to to manage shocks, and at the same time opportunity, which is the ability to make investments. And these 2 aspects, like I mentioned, are together form a cycle, such that once you're resilient, you're able to explore more opportunities, and when you explore more opportunities, you become even more resilient. And then secondly is just the fact that resilience reduces uncertainty and risks among low-income people, because it's a basic way of survival. So in building this theory of change, in building this theory of change within the project, financial services stakeholders need to point out aspects that can really reinforce resilience, knowing very well that this is going to bring somewhat some certainty in the lives of low-income people. And then well-being is not driven by individual decisions. It calls for collaboration industry-wide, where, for example, you're looking at the policies at national level and community levels, the partnerships that can be forged within the financial services stakeholders, and unanimously identifying the linkages between just providing accounts, but providing accounts for meaningful use cases. And then appreciating that the ability for people to capture opportunities is geared towards 3 things. That is improving their access to financial resources, of course, which is one of the things that the industry has done so well through the financial inclusion initiatives, but it doesn't end there. There's also the human capability driven through securing or pushing education to people, or improving the skills of people in terms of being resilient, and at the same time to how can they, sharpening their skills in terms of exploring opportunities, and even the physical capability, the well-being around, their health, their mobility, and so on and so forth. With that, we've also identified some priorities that we as an industry may start looking at in the immediate term. First of all is data, investing in more research to identify contextual variables, because yes, we have the low income segment, but the low income segment, like you have seen from Marion's and Amaka's case, they are very different in terms of the needs and their aspirations. So it calls for some research to actually get into their context to inform the way we structure programs or projects to complement financial inclusion initiatives. And then secondly, looking at prioritizing DFS for human capability. Education is really key, because in as much as you can provide, for instance, accounts, if Amaka does not understand what this account means in terms of her accessing food, or whatever solutions that we are providing, if we are not sharpening their skills in also identifying the linkages between the offerings and the use cases, then they're bound to doubt whatever solutions that are being presented. And then also just improving access to healthcare and other basic services. For example, we have seen a lot of pay-as-you-go models within the solar within the solar value chains, trying to provide access to solar home systems, but we haven't seen much in terms of other basic services like health. And like I mentioned earlier, the pandemic is just showing us, how vulnerable more people could be, and even people in the middle income segments are vulnerable in terms of health. So it's also time to prioritize DFS in terms of access to health, facilitating access to health. And of course, scaling up DFS that contributes to resilience. And then lastly, revisiting the MSME space.
Thank you very much, Jacqueline, for setting the context and helping us see how FSD Africa and the program is, reorienting your theory of change towards moving beyond just financial access in terms of access to mobile money accounts in specific, but also to going above and beyond in terms of assessing activity rates, to seeing how DFS is actually enabling and improving livelihoods. It's interesting that we brought the persona of Amaka, and we would like to now delve deeper into, if I could use the same case analogy of Amaka, and see if Amaka is a smallholder farmer in Nigeria or any part of the country. Who are some of the financial service providers that are out there serving her or other customers, and how are their interventions geared to ensuring that Amaka is able to take advantage of the opportunities that are in the agriculture space, as well as build resilience in that value chain. So to help us understand this and to give us real life examples of what's currently happening on the ground, allow me to hand over the mic to Elizabeth Masters from Apollo Agriculture, who will introduce to us how they are, leveraging technology in their financial interventions, and how they are building resilient value chains in Africa, and basically understand their experience in terms of fundraising and using these funds to scale agricultural services in Africa. Thank you. Over to you, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much, Christine, and thank you, Jacqueline, for sharing that context. As Christine said, I'm going to share an overview of Apollo Agriculture, which is the company I come from. My name is Liz. I'm from Apollo Agriculture. I'm our chief of staff. Apollo is an agricultural technology company, and we use technology to deliver agricultural inputs on credit to small-scale farmers. We were founded in 2017, so still pretty young, but we've grown to about 40,000 customers in about 4 seasons. And our mission is to bring commercial farming to customers, to farmers across Africa. So a bit of context about the nature of this problem. As you can see in this graph, African farmers on average are producing way less yields than they could, about 10 to 20% of what farmers in, say, the United States are making. And so what that gets us is this massive opportunity for investment. There's so much opportunity in agriculture, and I think we hear a lot about that, but we have these chronic challenges that prevent that opportunity from being realized. And so 2 of those issues are that the majority of land in sub-Saharan Africa is farmed by farmers, these small-scale farmers who are rural, they're remote, they're difficult to reach, they're highly fragmented, and they have really small holdings. And part of that problem is also that they lack access to capital. Without capital, they can't access these really simple tools like seed and fertilizer that are key to sparking that sort of agricultural transformation that we all know is possible. These farmers don't have financial histories. They can't go to a bank and say, I'd like, to access a line of credit. And so their yields are sort of perpetually constrained by that cycle. And from a bank's perspective, to reach that farmer who's so rural, who's 7 kilometers off of the nearest tarmac road, the cost of acquiring that customer, delivering inputs to them is just too high to make any sort of commercially viable approach with a human-based model. This is sort of where our solution comes in. Technology lets us to approach this problem in a new way. And we use things like imagery from satellite data to understand customers, where their farms are. We can use machine learning to build credit profiles for customers who don't have formal financial credit histories. And finally, as sort of Jacqueline shared, the digital financial services of M-Pesa allow us to transact with customers who are far away. And that's really powerful. So our approach is to use these tools, these digital tools, to bundle everything a farmer needs, but typically can't access. So that's farm inputs, advice on best practices, insurance to protect against bad agronomic outcomes, and market access when possible. All of that on credit at the start of the season. And we use these automated operations to enable scale and to reduce the cost of delivering goods and services to these customers. And when we can reduce that cost, we can actually build a sustainable business, providing financing, providing these inputs on credit to customers. So that's very theoretical. So I'll walk you through from the perspective of a customer, what does that actually look like? So as context, our average customer has holdings of about 1.5 acres. They have a feature phone. The keypad is rubbed off. It's got a cracked screen. They're not tech literate. They don't have a smartphone. And so we have to meet that customer where they are, because that is the average customer across the continent. So starting with how a customer hears about Apollo, we use things like road shows, radio advertisements, and incentivized mobile referrals. So if Christine's a farmer and I can give her a code and she can go and tell all of her neighbors, hey, I have this, if you sign up, you get 100 shillings off and I get 100 shillings off. And that's a very effective channel for us. So from there, Christine has signed up for this loan. She's really excited about Apollo and she wants to sign up and get this loan, but we have to know where she is. So we need a human touch point at some point in this life cycle. So what we do is we've built this sort of an Uber-based model to work with largely young people in the communities that we serve in our territories. And young people, more tech savvy, they know how to use a smartphone, and often they're underemployed. And so we provide sort of commission-based work for these people on for these agents using a smartphone app that we developed. And what they'll do is we'll automatically assign Christine to her nearest agent. So the agent comes and we'll sort of walk the boundaries of the plot. That lets us know how big is the farm. A lot of farmers actually are surprised to find out that actually your acreage is 1.5 and not 2 acres as they've been told. The agent will also verify Christine's identity by taking a picture of her national ID and collect other observable data. So does she have a cow? Does she have chickens? What is her roof made out of? Things like that. From there, we have the data that we need to make a credit decision. We also Christine would do a phone-based survey to supply other information that we may not have gathered at that point. Then we have the data we need. We decide Christine is a great credit risk for us, and so we give her a loan. She gets an SMS-based voucher. She brings that voucher to her nearest agro dealer. We have about over 300 agro dealer partners across Kenya right now. And the agro dealer does last mile distribution for us. And so you can't SMS a bag of fertilizer, right? There's nothing you can do to make that more tech friendly. But what we can do is build technology on top of systems and entities that already exist and just make them more efficient. And that's what we've done with agro dealer partners and with agents. So Christine brings her voucher to her agro dealer. The agro dealer supplies her with a customized bundle, right size to her farm. She'll then bring that home with her, and then over the course of the season, she'll receive automated trainings delivered like normal phone calls. So this is another big issue. If you text, a 7 texts about how to do land preparation or top dress fertilizer application, nobody wants that information, no matter how well written it is. And so what we've done is we've developed these automated trainings that are voice-based, they're highly engaging, they're local language, and they're just delivered like a phone call. So a customer can just pick up and listen. And if they miss it, they can call back and get to a toll-free number and get the same training that they missed. And then over the course of the season, the farmers pays back slowly as they have cash, with the full loan due after harvest. And that's really important. And that's where satellite imagery comes in, because if we assigned this is an asset-based credit product, so the sort of value proposition is that a customer will realize the investment and then pay the loan. And that's critical because for most of these farmers, this is their main source of income. And so satellite imagery allows us to dynamically adapt the deadline for the customer. So if we find out that, we estimated in the beginning of the season that Christine was going to harvest her crop in November, but actually it looks like, based on satellite imagery of her field, that she is not going to harvest until 2 weeks later, then we can adapt and push back her deadline, which is really important because otherwise we could push Christine into default, even though she has this, willingness to repay. So that's the customer journey. This slide just tells you some of the insights that we can gather from satellite data. And again, this is just, I think, illustrative of the promise of technology and what it allows us to do, to really understand what's going on a farm without dispatching, a loan officer every few weeks to check in on these very small loans. Our average loan size is about 140, 150 USD, so very small. And that's it. That's the overview. And I'm happy to speak to the 2 topics that Christine mentioned, one about fundraising and our experience so far, and the other about how we adapted in the context of COVID. But Christine, I'll leave it to you to tell me which one you'd like me to speak to.
Sure, thank you for that overview. And it's very interesting to see how you're using satellite data to literally, adjust the repayment schedule for farmers based on how and when they'll harvest. And just to pick up on that, probably we'll begin with, so during the COVID period and the pandemic, did you use any of this data in terms of, adjusting or pivoting some of your risk models? And how did you navigate that? And how do you see in future, since the pandemic is still ongoing, you designing and your risk modeling around farmers in different value chains?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so as anybody who's in Kenya knows, right now we're about 2 weeks away from the rain, and we're probably the only technology company on earth that is so closely aligned to periods of rain, because we make loans during the long rain season. And that's relevant because when COVID when lockdown happened in Kenya, we were in the middle of our season. We have this brief window where we roll customers around the room. If we're late on that, if we're a few weeks late on that, we're no longer relevant. A customer just doesn't need our product anymore. And so we had to extremely quickly, because, for example, as I mentioned, we do have a call center that takes inbound customer requests. And we had them all, we had our entire call center under one roof. We had over 100 people. And we had 2 days, given lockdown restrictions, to move them to remote work, which was a little insane. And I think being a technology company allowed us to sort of move really quickly and not, be waiting for other service providers to make that change when it really counted. The other thing I think that we saw was that, agriculture is one of those businesses that is very timeless, and it's relevant no matter what. And so we felt this, huge obligation to our customers to not really allow for disruption in that, because a lot of customers are relying on us for these products. And we did see demand. It's hard to say, of course, how demand affects growth, but I think we did see, we grew from about 8,000 customers in our 2019 long range season to 25,000 customers in our 2020 long range season in the middle of a lockdown. And I think unless if our customer acquisition and loan underwriting processes had relied on human beings, that just wouldn't have been possible. And so, yeah, I think we've seen that we didn't build, our business to be COVID proof in any way. We didn't anticipate a global pandemic, but we are extremely grateful, because it's not just about, scale and growth and efficiency. It's also about the sort of resilience and sustainability of our business and our operations. And I think we really saw that tested in the context of COVID.
Okay, excellent. Maybe also just for the benefit of, all the SMEs who are, listening to us today and participating, I'm sure they'd like to understand what is your experience in terms of raising funding and from different platforms, whether it's grant funding, whether it's debt or equity. And then what are some of the things that the funders are looking at to ensure that this money is actually creating impact in the agriculture sector in Africa?
Yeah, so we've had a very, I think, fortunate journey so far. And actually, the Fund for Rural Prosperity was one of our early funders. Running a technology company is not inexpensive, for sure. And we had to get a lot of different, partners, both donors and investors, to understand both the magnitude of the opportunity commercially and also the impact opportunity. And both of those are absolutely fundamental to our business. I think that the other thing that makes us sort of unique as a startup is that you're contending with just massive amounts of risk. Every startup faces huge risk, right? But then be a technology company subject to fall armyworm, drought, locusts. There's just all this additional risk inherent in working in agriculture. And then you're saying, and also we want to make uncollateralized loans to unbanked rural smallholder farmers. And I think the average investor finds that pretty intimidating. So early on, especially in our first few years, we were very lucky to have a few grant partners who said, we get this, and we get that there's both an impact and commercial ambition, and we understand the role that philanthropy can play, that grants can play in sort of catalyzing this. In my experience, I had worked for Root Capital prior, so I had to joining Apollo, which is an agricultural impact investor. So I was very familiar with the sort of grant space to enable and unlock sort of catalytic agricultural investment. But what really surprised me was that, the granting world isn't really well suited to startups. Startups change their minds a lot. You don't write a plan that is going to look the same as what you actually execute in 3 years. You have to be able to change your mind quickly. And what I've seen and what I'm really impressed by is that I think the world of sort of philanthropic support for startups is emerging, and that there is this sort of willingness to be a learning partner alongside it. Because I think, as with the Fund with Rural Prosperity, in our case, there was this deep investment in really understanding, okay, your idea seems a little nuts, but it's interesting, and if this works, it would be very, informative for what's possible when we combine technology and layer technology into a sector like agriculture. So that's on the one side. And on the other side, we have, our investors. Again, we have a lot of impact-oriented investors, for sure, but there's also a lot of excitement about the commercial opportunity in agriculture and the commercial opportunity. I mean, as you saw in that chart, there's just, in the beginning, that yield gap represents a massive opportunity. If you can double, triple, quadruple customers' yields, that's just super exciting, whether you care about impact or you care about making money. And so that's a really cool thing. And I think what we saw was that especially in our early days, our philanthropic partners sort of de-risked our growth in a way and allowed our commercial investors to feel more comfortable taking a bet. And then of course, equity on the debt side, we make loans and we have to raise working capital from investors to make those loans. And that I would say is among the harder parts of our business, where in no way are we, we're definitely not better than a bank. I don't think we want to be experts in raising capital necessarily. But we found it to be the most efficient thing to do. So, a lot of people ask us, do you intend to partner with a bank to sort of meet your working capital needs? And the answer is we would love to. But we're just, I think we've also had to sort of prove that this market is bankable first on our own. And then we're very excited about the idea of pursuing partnerships that let us do that with more ease and efficiency.
Excellent. Thank you very, very much, Liz. I'm encouraging all participants, in case you have questions for the two speakers who've already spoken, kindly post them. And thank you for introducing MasterCard Fund for Rural Prosperity. And we will now move on over to Grace, who's the Deputy Manager of the project. And then she can give us a brief about how the intervention is designed and how they're assessing impact and how they put, companies like Apollo to task to ensure that the funding is, meeting the objectives.
Thank you, Christine. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, good evening. So thank you so much, Liz. You've set the stage very well in terms of the challenges that we were looking to at least mitigate with the Fund for Rural Prosperity. And these are still very real, affecting our participants and also other businesses and financial service providers in the agricultural sector. The seasonality, of course, unfortunate COVID-19 pandemic, that has really had an impact on our participants and also our ability to track impact from the beneficiary standpoint. So as Christine said, I'm Grace Mberia. I'm the Deputy Team Leader of the MasterCard Foundation Fund for Rural Prosperity. So this is our $50 million challenge fund that was designed to enable about 1 million underserved people in rural sub-Saharan Africa to have access to at least appropriate savings, credit, insurance products and services across sub-Saharan Africa. So we do cover 15 countries, 38 participants across. So Central Africa, Western and Eastern Africa mostly, and a few participants in Southern Africa as well, that's Zambia. So our portfolio, given how diverse it is, one of the key things we were looking at is not just access to finance, but also how to de-risk, which Liz mentioned, those businesses that want to either innovate or scale in the agricultural sector, especially to reach the underserved people in the rural agricultural sector. So this has been running for 6 years now. We're in our 7th year, which has given us a chance to collect and analyze quite a bit of data from an impact perspective. So far, as at half one of last year, that 3.7 million customers had actually been reached by our 38 participants. About 1.9 million in 2019 alone. Of course, there was a slowdown in 2020 because of the pandemic, but still some of our participants like Apollo, just as Liz has mentioned, were able to quickly find ways to be resilient and recover from the pandemic, and hence we are still able to deliver impact in 2020. From that, we've also tracked how many women and youth are served. So about 33% youth and women have been served by our participants. About 158 financial products launched. So I could go on and on in terms of the impact that our participants have been able to achieve. And we credit a lot of that to their innovation, ability to adapt, as Liz said, because in the agricultural sector, there are so many factors that affect the impacts and also outreach of these businesses. And remember, again, we were very keen on commercial viability because we want sustainability even when the fund comes to a close. We want to hear and follow our participants 10, 20 years from now and see that they're still. So just to look at what innovative solutions we've provided, I did mention we're a challenge fund, so primarily used grants to deliver this mechanism. What we did just to ensure commitment by our participants is to ensure that our grantees matched at least 30% of their own contribution. But this was not only cash, it was in kind as well. So we covered about 15 innovation projects, 6 scaling projects, and about 17 rolling projects, which are both innovation and scaling, a total of 38. And what we try then to do is to build markets by transforming rural financial services. So we try to reduce market distortion and inefficiencies in this space. So of course, we have varied business models, like direct banking, input finance, outgrower models, technology, as Liz has mentioned for Apollo, and asset financing, just to name a few. So this is how we facilitate the financing initiative. And we didn't want just to look at credit because, as Liz mentioned, there's a huge risk in the agricultural sector, especially because of the unpredictability. So a lot of farmers are uninsured, which then creates a huge risk in terms of how then they can access products and services and how they can protect themselves from this unpredictability. So we're also looking at innovative insurance solutions and also financial literacy services, as mentioned by Liz. So that was one of the things that we were very keen on. So given we've had the benefit of 6 years, at least we've been able to have a view of what is working well, what needs industry effort innovating, and what next, what can we look at? So one of the things that we have been very keen on doing, even as we disseminate information and the results from our participants, is fostering that change in attitude towards risk of financing agri-based businesses and agri-based SMEs. Of course, remember Liz said that at the beginning, a lot of investors might have thought that that innovative service and product that they wanted to provide was a huge risk, and hence they would have been maybe shied away from investing. So that change in attitude is very key in terms of bolstering innovation in the agri-based SMEs business. Also, just developing a transformation of financing initiatives. So digital finance services have been very key in agribusiness, especially because of outreach. Rural farmers are not easily accessible. Remember, Liz showed the phone that had a cracked screen, no internet access. So then if we're able to provide access and link these smallholder farmers to the SMEs and businesses, then that also bolsters innovation and especially creating jobs for the youth. Also, one of the things we've noted is key is allocating sufficient time to achieve intended results and impact. I feel, and we've noted that the agri business needs patient capital, long-term capital, to allow that innovation. Innovation takes time, not just the idea, but also implementation. So the investors would need to be very patient to see the results and to create that win-win situation. And that's where the Fund for Rural Prosperity came in, because we were a long-term fund. 7 years at least gives our participants time to get things right, adapt, rethink. We've had some of our participants change their initial model, of course, through consultation with us, which then has gotten them to the point of kicking off and then starting to see results. And that then also gives confidence to private investors that this actually works. But if there is no access to that long-term patient capital, then a lot of these businesses might not make it past, say, the first, second, or third year, which is the statistics we've seen for SMEs across all sectors anyway. So in terms of reliance on donor funding, yes, this is a sector that would want to become more sustainable, but given the risk I just mentioned about access to long-term patient financing, then that's where maybe blended finance comes in, where the donor funding sort of catalyzes private investment. But then again, this is not something that will happen overnight. Remember, for us, like Liz mentioned, it's been a journey, even then to get to the point where they can access debt to the level that they would want. So I think the presence and need for donor funding is still very real in the agriculture sector. So of course, some of the things that can be done is just work plans factoring in that time taken to develop and integrate solutions, especially IT solutions. And then constant engagement with farmers. That pays off because loyalty is created. Businesses are able to adapt the offering to meet the needs of the farmers, which then makes the business more viable. Of course, ability to partner with companies along different value chains, that's an area that we are really trying to foster from an FRP perspective, encouraging our participants to partner with companies along different value chains and with also access to investors. So also balancing that speed to scale with exposure to risk. So in terms of then how do you increase, say, your average loan size and still have a well-managed portfolio risk? So setting up risk management departments, educating their customers, high interaction with farmers as mentioned. So those are some of the areas that we have learned are very important. And also just finding ways to improve the overall well-being of the farmers through the products that are innovated. So digital trainings can be done, peer-to-peer training courses, and also then considering for those businesses that are innovating, just constantly looking at whether the products are working or not, as opposed to maybe just pumping more and more money into a product that is not going to break even or turn into profit at some point. So for us, those are some of the things that we've considered in how we can innovate and scale agrofinancing solutions. So
it's a very interesting sector, and thank you for highlighting the need for patient capital to enable, the beneficiaries and SMEs to adapt their realities on the ground and to be able to adapt their innovations. Maybe allow me to just follow up with a question in terms of how you track impact at the beneficiary level. So you've mentioned, for instance, you've reached a certain percentage of women through the program. So it's much easier, the first layer of tracking, the first layer of access. So like, for instance, percentage of, women or smallholder farmers reached. But then what about the second layer in terms of what impact has this done to those who you've accessed, or has it brought to those who you've accessed? So do you face any challenges, and how are you designing impact matrices around the qualitative aspects for the smallholder farmers or for even the beneficiaries of your program?
okay, thanks for that, Christine. So we have been very intentional in gathering data throughout the 6 years that the fund has been in existence. We use a blend of self-reporting by the participants, as well as site visits and customer engagement, which of course has been really affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. But one of the other things that we have done coming from that assessment is we actually designed a COVID-19 resilience and recovery window, picking from that information. And one of the things that we are doing is in-depth impact studies on at least 8 participants on how they have been able to handle COVID-19 to protect jobs and also to protect their beneficiaries from, say, defaulting and ending up in basically without access to credit, back to square one. So those in-depth impact studies have been very important. We have used multiplier effects just to scale and understand how this might be affecting the agricultural sector, so that then we can be more innovative. So we are always analyzing the information that we receive from participants and the reporting data. We also have participant learning events. We're actually having one this afternoon. And those learning events then help us gather additional information. So from these events and our in-depth studies, and we are able to not only gather quantitative data, but also qualitative in terms of how are the businesses being impacted, how are the beneficiaries being impacted. So for beneficiaries, we actually also conduct surveys just to understand better how the products have improved their lives, how have they used them. Of course, interestingly enough, you'll find that maybe some of the beneficiaries say, I maybe diverted my funds during COVID-19 because my needs changed. So probably use the credit they accessed for different purposes and not what had been intended. So some of that information would not have been able to pick without the surveys that we performed.
Thank you very, very much. Just before we move into discussing education, there's a question in the chat I see from Tanvi for Elizabeth specifically. She's asking, do you apply a gender lens in providing farmers with access to loans? And how has your experience differed in working with men versus women smallholder farmers in terms of using technology?
So when there's a bit of context here that I'll share, but I promise I'm getting to the answer. When we first launched, we made loans without a credit model, meaning we basically 6,000 people opted in for the loan, and we gave loans to 1,000 people at random. And that might seem crazy, but the reason we did that was because we're building a credit model, and a credit model relies on data. to tell it and train it over time who's a good fit for this product. And you need repayment data to tell you that. And if you start with a biased data set, so for example, saying, we're only going to make loans to women over 65, you limit the opportunity to learn. And so over time, as we built this credit model, we basically made a version of a credit model and then continued to make loans at random. And then what that lets us do is not overfit. So to not over index on, perhaps customers, just as an example, customers in Nakuru paid really, really well, customers in Kericho didn't. Okay, maybe that tells us that customers in Kericho aren't good customers, but actually there was a drought in Kericho. And so if you overfit on that data, the credit model will tell you, hey, don't make loans in this area, it's no good. But what you really find is, okay, you're over indexing, you're over fitting on a particular data set that is actually not correlated with credit risk. It's just, one-off risk. So the reason I say that is because we've taken the approach of lending as widely as we possibly can. So making loans to as many people as we can and learning over time whether or not certain, what characteristics are indicative of credit risk. And that's a complex question. Gender certainly matters, but it is one among many, 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 many factors that go into our understanding of a person's credit risk, which is sort of a long-winded way of saying kind of. On the other hand, we know that there's massive power and impact when women access loans. And so we do make an effort to at least proportionally have sort of 50-50 split between men and women. And there's so much to understand. We still feel like we're learning about what makes somebody a good credit risk. Gender definitely is one of those features. But our aim is to lend to as many farmers as we possibly can and to sort of create no preliminary or pre-existing exclusions.
Okay, thank you very, very much. In the interest of time as well, allow us to move into the education sector and give an opportunity to Amos just to give us, his take on why it's important to have tailor-made education services, financial services for the education sector, and some of the innovative things they are doing, going beyond just providing financial services, but also in providing that financial services. Over to you, Amos.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Christine. Good evening, good afternoon to everyone. I'll talk about education financing from Ed Partners perspective. And let me first of all start by introducing Ed Partners. Ed Partners is a non-banking finance company that started operations in June 2018. We are based in Kenya, and we finance affordable private schools. What we saw is a huge need that exists in the market, whereby affordable private schools could not access credit from commercial banks. They could not access credit from microfinance institutions for various reasons. From the commercial banking perspective, affordable private schools present a high credit risk, given that they don't keep good financial records, and they tend to then avoid them and deal with the higher SMEs and those ones that are well established. On the microfinance side, affordable private schools do not fit properly because they look for larger ticket sizes, they look for longer tenors, because the loans are largely infrastructural, as I'll be speaking into as we proceed. So when you look at the demand side, we see greater need for education. Over 30% of the school-going children in Kenya attend affordable private schools. We are talking close to 5 million students in the country. If you look at urban areas, we have over 50% of the school-going children being served by the affordable private schools. And this is largely in the informal sector, whereby you find the distance to the available public school is, it's a long distance, and the public school is even not having capacity to admit more kids. In Nairobi, we have one of the affordable public schools that is already serving 3,000 students, and you wonder now how teachers are coping with that. So we saw a need to then support these schools to grow, whereby they can be able then to serve more students, because as the population continues to grow, we see greater need for these affordable private schools. Again, the government has been spending a lot of money on education, but the large part of that goes to financing the recurrent budget for teacher salaries and all that. So we provide infrastructure rooms to do more classrooms, to expand the facilities within the school to cater for more students. We also do school transport to enable the affordable private schools to increase the geographical reach. We also provide advisory services. Our research showed that schools do not just need capital, they also need advisory services to improve their systems, to improve financial management, leadership within the schools, so that they can become great schools. What we have seen is that after we finance these schools, once they're able to do more classes, they have been able to increase their enrollments. They are now able to serve larger geographical zones because they have school transport. The kids are able to be transported from school to home and back through safe means of transport, because initially they were being transported to school using motorbikes, which are not safe for students. And also we have seen better student to teacher ratio. And you know, this is one of the proxies that we use to check education quality. If you have a class whereby a teacher is attending to more than 30 students, then we doubt as to whether she's able to give personal attention to the learners' individual circumstances. So we see schools within our portfolio having student to teacher ratio of less than 25, which would say is a good indicator. In terms of quality, we also see when schools receive finance, they improve their incomes, they're able to enroll more, they're able to hire better qualified teachers, retain them, they're able to buy curriculum materials, and they're able to even improve the learning environment within the schools. Maybe then the question is, what do we need to do for us to be able to design education financial solutions for the African market? What we saw as Ed Partners, and what we did is, first of all, we did a market research to understand what the market needs. Because as I said, more often than not, affordable private schools have been categorized as SMEs, and most financiers have assumed that the solutions that apply to SMEs would apply to affordable private schools. Our research proved otherwise, that you need products that have been specifically designed for affordable private schools. And I can give examples. If you look at the cash flows of affordable private schools, schools only receive cash when they are open. They don't have anything coming when they are closed. You need to understand how that cash comes through. You need to understand their challenges. You need to understand their needs. And as I said, you need to understand the non-financial needs, like financial management issues, which can affect your offerings. So then with that, then you innovate products and solutions that work for them. So for us, we have been able to come up with school improvement loans. We have been able to come up with asset finance loans. We have been able to come up with a working capital product that we're able to release during the COVID season. And also we have the advisory services that I mentioned about. The other thing that is required is that education finance is a huge and capital intensive affair. It requires partnerships. There is no single company that can be able to address that on its own. So you need partnerships with debt providers. You need equity. You need the government to play its role. You need donors. You need GFIs to all come up and partner and ensure that you are creating solutions that work. When I talk about partnerships, what we see, debt providers may not really understand this asset class. Of course, they understand microfinance, they understand banking and all that. This is a new asset class which needs to be understood, how it works, and the risk within the portfolio. From the government side, we look at it from the regulation side. In Kenya, getting registered and having a certificate to operate a private schools take a very long period of time. You realize a school is already in operations, they have never gotten the final certificate, they still have an interim letter of registration. So we would want a scenario whereby The registration does not take that long, and it doesn't create inefficiencies that can be abused along the process. From a DFI perspective, we would see an opportunity of creating risk-sharing arrangements whereby more debt providers can be incentivized to participate in this market with risk-sharing agreements, with fast draws, guarantee covers, to ensure that we are de-risking the education finance portfolio and ensure that we scale our finance within the sector. I think COVID came in with its own challenges. From Ed Partners' perspective, what we did is that we gave all the schools a moratorium all the way from the month of April to December. We're also able to give them a working capital product to help them meet the health and safety requirements that had been put by the Ministry of Education, to help them meet the working capital shortfalls, because you remember most of these schools are on rented properties, they have teachers to pay. So we came up with a product that was able to help them to mitigate the risk of closure during that period. However, we are happy when they reopened in January, they have come back and they're able to pay their facilities, and we are seeing repayment rates of above 95%, which is very encouraging. I think I would leave it there for now, Christine, and allow you or the participants to ask questions.
Excellent. Thank you very, very much for elaborating on some of the financial solutions that you've provided, the schools to meet their infrastructure needs and, to adapt to the COVID situation that we find ourselves in. Maybe just to speak a little bit more about the advisory and the non-financial side of things. How are you supporting these schools to be able, to improve their operations? And ultimately, probably, if you're collecting any data that is enabling you to tweak or to even design better products for local schools in Kenya in specific or in Africa.
Thank you, Christine. As I said, our research showed that schools do not just need capital to become good schools. They need non-financial solutions, that is advisory services. So what they told us is that they needed to be assisted on financial management. So what we did is that we set up a financial management training in partnership with financial consultants, which every school chooses whether they want to go through it or not. It's not mandatory, but we have seen more and more of our schools registering for the course, and it will help them in terms of budgeting, cash flow management, setting up their fees, managing fee areas, and all that. We have also done a partnership with school system vendors. And we also finance these school systems for schools to be able to improve their record keeping. You remember I said lack of good records makes them look like they are high credit risk, which they are not. So most of them now are adopting systems to be able to improve their school fee correction and ensure that they know who has paid and who has not paid. The other thing that we did during COVID, we asked ourselves, how do we assist these affordable private schools, given that they have closed and they do not have even anyone to consult with or support them? So we introduced webinars. We were doing weekly webinars, which were talking through how do you cope during this time of crisis, how do you manage your cash flow, how do you prepare for reopening, and including even seminars on stress management and looking for alternative sources of income to mitigate the risk of closure within our portfolio and even non-customers.
Excellent. So one last question for me, then we can move on to discussing affordable housing. Is looking at EdTech, maybe your experience in terms of whether you have worked or lent or provided financial solutions for EdTech companies, because I think what all of us have learned from COVID is that there will be, yes, a new normal, but technology will be very key in getting scaling education across the country. And so we have different EdTech models that are coming up in terms of bringing education into the homes of children across Africa. What is your experience in terms of financing such EdTech companies in the different models that are out there? And what are some of the challenges that you see in terms of financing EdTech companies?
Thank you, Christine. Yeah, you're right. Online learning is no longer a luxury. It's actually something that is required to be there post-COVID to complement the classroom environment. So we have been encouraging our customers to uptake online learning solutions. Definitely across the country, the uptake was very low. And the challenges are obvious. In internet connectivity was a problem, access to devices was a challenge, but we are also talking to the supply side to come up with, custom-made solutions that can work within the affordable private schools. We do not finance edtechs, but we are willing to finance our customers to be able to acquire those solutions. The challenge I see is basically on affordability of internet and the issue of those products being unaffordable on the part of the students and the parents. That's where the challenge is. And you remember I talked about partnerships. Such are the services that donors can take up, while the commercial side is left to the rights of ed partners and other players.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. I'm encouraging all participants to post any questions you have for the speakers, and we'll have another round at the end for questions. So allow me to hand over to George Mugweru, just to give us a brief about what is innovative in terms of financing affordable housing in Africa. Over to you, George.
Thank you so much, Christine. It's a pleasure to meet you and all the speakers and participants. My name is George Mugweru. I'm with Habitat for Humanity International. I'm a specialist in housing market systems, and I lead housing finance efforts in the region. It's great to hear Amos speak about education and really identify with him in terms of some of the very critical sectors that have had a lot of challenges when it comes to financing, yet they play a very critical role in our country, and it's very, very similar to affordable housing. And because all of us have gone through the COVID-19 experience, maybe as an opening statement, perhaps is to maybe reflect through. I know in March last year, when there was a lockdown and people are told to work from home, just think about many families here in Kenya. It's replicated across Africa and many regions of the world. When people are told to go home, to stay at home, to work from home, to school from home, what that means to many, many families. You would appreciate that a lot of the families don't have luxuries of many rooms. If you have a father working from home, mother working from home, 3 children trying to do online classes, it's almost impossible. And that, in a way, brought for some of the challenges that people do face, especially low-income population, because of inadequate housing. So Habitat for Humanity International, just as an introduction, is a philanthropic organization, is a non-profit, non-governmental organization. And the vision is to see that the world has a decent place to live. Over the years, Habitat has been involved in provision of shelter, especially for the very vulnerable. But Habitat for Humanity established a center called the Tawiriga Center for Innovation in Shelter, basically because of appreciating that low-income population do work with the markets many of the times. Even with their meager incomes and the challenges that they face, they really work with the market to access a solution and to access some of the available options in the market to build. And so the Tawiriga Center works with the market to try and increase access to client-responsive products and services so that people can be able to improve their shelter more effectively and efficiently. In terms of our, vision for change, we are keen to address, as a facilitator, to address some of the systemic bottlenecks or barriers in order to enable families to become shelter inclusive. And one of the key elements is access to housing finance, because if people can be able to access finance, then they are halfway through in trying to access better shelter. In terms of our global efforts, like over the last 1 decade, the Tawilga Center has worked with over 100 financial institutions to make housing finance accessible to about 4 million families, and also seeing these institutions raise over provide finance worth about 6.5 billion shillings. We've leveraged some of those partnerships to support some of these financial intermediaries to develop and test, but also scale some of client-centric solutions around affordable housing, but also embedding it with the housing non-financial support. Because it's not only access to finance. If you think about housing, it's a fairly complex environment, and so access to finance alone cannot allow families to build. So you also have to think about what are some of the other non-financial services that you need to provide, be they market linkages, be they education, be they access to information, so that people can be able to utilize their finance and then build. In terms of local interventions, you all know about our housing situation here in Kenya. We currently stand at over 2 million housing deficit. So this deficit grow annually with about 250,000 units. In some of the estimates, it's way higher. And our urbanization rate is at 4.2%, which is expected to increase in the coming years. If you look at the financing side, we only have slightly over 27,000 mortgage accounts. And that would tell you that majority of the population is not financing their housing through mortgage, but through other ways of, alternative ways of financing, especially non-mortgage backed finance, be they unsecured loan, development loans from SACCOs, others are, just, business loans that they convert into housing. And so for the Tawilga Center for Innovation in Shelter, our key focus is to promote financing for incremental housing, because as you know, majority of people that we serve, even when finance would be made available, many of them cannot afford a cheapest house. Even if you are to do some small calculation of, say, a house that is worth 4 million shillings, and some of these units are not available, it would on average cost you about 70,000 payment installment. That is way out of reach of many low-income populations. And for low-income population, majorly, they will build through an incremental building process. And so our focus has been, how do we support financial intermediaries so that they can be able to finance this particular segment, because that's the only way this population can build. Some of the interventions I've been involved in, a few years ago, we implemented a 6-year project. We partnered with the MasterCard Foundation on a project called Building Assets, Unlocking Access. And the project looked at, or mostly was involved in providing technical assistance to a number of financial institutions here in Kenya and Uganda, and so that they can be able to develop housing finance targeted to low-income population, but more focus on helping them build incrementally. And this financial institution combined have been able to reach over 100,000 families. Some of the other areas that we are also involved in is shelter and innovation. So we launched a shelter accelerator program here in Kenya. We also do have one in India and Mexico. But the one in Kenya, the focus was to identify, accelerate, and link to investment some early and growth Kenya companies that are providing shelter solutions. So the package was needed to link them with the capacity building, mentorship, but also most importantly, some that were not investor ready, we did put in some catalytic funding to help them pilot some of the solutions they had so that they can be investor ready. The other area of focus that we've been involved in is property microinsurance. So in 2015, we carried out a study. We showed that about 35% of low-income families, especially in the informal settlement, were affected by a calamity, be it flooding, fire, or some of the insurable issues. But none of them had any access to an insurance facility. And so we've partnered with ILO, and we are currently supporting Britam to develop some innovative property microinsurance solution targeted to low income and underserved market segment. Some of our hypotheses really around property microinsurance or microinsurance in general. One is the perception. People have a poor perception about microinsurance. We want to see if we can be able to support a product that would try and address some of those issues. The other key challenge is, operational capacity of some of the insurance companies to serve this segment. So what would it take for them to build that capacity and serve this population segment? And some of the solutions we are hypothesizing is, for example, use of technology to increase registration or reach or sign-ups, but also issues to do with claim processing, underwriting, by use of technology. And that in a way perhaps might be able to address some of those systemic challenges. The other one is bundling. Would it solve some of the problems? If for example, you were to bundle a fire insurance with cooking oil or gas, for example, how would that work? And those are some of the things we are thinking about as hypothesis. And so in the next couple of years, we will be trying to explore a property microinsurance solution that can serve this segment. In terms of behavior change, like I did mention, that we recognize that access to finance is critical, but access to finance is one piece. How do you then also increase usage and utilization of finance? So we have partnered with a digital platform called Arifu to provide access to information and education around housing and housing finance, so that household can make better decisions around housing finance. And it's also to de-risk people at the household level, because the nature of housing is really expensive, and sometimes credit is not the only solution. So how do you also build capacity of household to save towards owning a home? And so that digital education is accessible, and anybody can access it. If you just said, Arifu to 22744, you can be able to just follow the flow, and under the finance, you'll be able to see housing finance and access that information. What we're also trying to do in partnership with the Association of Microfinance Institutions and 3 institutions in Kenya is to build a case for embedding housing finance education to housing finance products, and build a case with a view of encouraging financial institutions to do the same. That, there's potential if you offer credit, but don't just offer housing credit, but you can bundle it up with housing non-financial services So we are trying to build a case there, and hopefully in the coming months, we'll be able to share that also to the sector. The other thing that we are also doing is in renewable energy. We are supporting microfinance institution to offer paperless renewable energy financing. On one hand, to increase access, but also to support them partner with solar solution suppliers who can commit to provide quality solar solution to households. What the road to scale look like? I would say I would look at 4 areas, and this is based on our experience being in this space. One is we really need to focus on household by ensuring that we are providing access to housing that meet their needs or pain points, but also their preferences. When it comes to housing, it's diverse. People have different preferences. It's different between different segments. And for that reason, for you to be able to serve this segment, in terms of providing finance, it has to be finance that respond to their needs, but also in their situation, their preferences, and also their capacity to pay. The financial intermediary level leader is to develop and test some scalable solution, because one of the biggest gap that has been there is demonstration and lack of business cases that then would inspire financial service sector to invest in alternative housing financing mechanism. So again, a big gap in terms of them understanding and appreciating the huge potential that is in the market. So if we can be able to lead work with them to test financial solutions that would really work, but that would also be sustainable and scalable. That would go a long way in trying to improve access to finance. In terms of investor, this is an area that have seen very little investment, especially for appropriate finance. Both for financial institutions, there's a lack of, a lot of them, especially when you talk about microfinance, what they do access is either credit from commercial bank or some small savings that are very short term from their clients. So this is not appropriate finance that can really be invested in affordable housing. So there is need to mobilize patient capital in this space. But like I said again, for investors, if we are able to develop business cases, then this can go a long way in trying to address this problem. At the regulatory level, this is a big piece because housing is tied to many other aspects, be they materials, be it land, and so just ensuring that the environment is enabling people to access credit, but also access other housing solution and other connected pieces would be important. Yeah, so I want to stop there, Christine. Yeah.
Thank you, George, so much for highlighting what are some of the interventions that is being used to scale affordable and decent housing in Africa and specifically in Kenya. In the interest of time, we've overrun, and thank you very much for everybody who's still with us. I just want to ask John to quickly just let us know, so because one of the critical factors is that you work with the financial service providers, and what is the uptake for using or financing alternative building materials or houses using alternative building materials, because these alternative building materials bring down the cost. Just please quickly 1 minute answer to that, and then we close the session kindly.
Okay. Yeah, so this is very limited, Christine. We have not seen many of them do that. And it's a big gap because again, it's on one hand, the proponents of alternative building materials have claimed they are cheap and they are more affordable, but we also don't have very good standards in terms of ensuring that these materials are tested and they will not necessarily bring a lot of risk to financial institutions. So what we are also doing as Habitat is also to support that space, either by building exemplar house or just furthering analysis of alternative building materials and the technology space, and so that there are better informations and standards then which we can de-risk financial institutions and allow them to fund that space.
Okay, thank you very much to all our speakers and to our participants. As we leave and close the session, kindly let's remember at the back of our minds what for, why we designing these financial institutions or implementing financial interventions so that we can be able to scale basic services in Africa. Thank you very, very much for your time. Goodbye and thank you all.